Thank you for coming. This is our last panel for MAGFest. We had 3. In the past, we've had as many as 5 and other individual talks. My name is Steve Sheets. I'm a longtime software developer in all areas of desktop, mobile, and now VR and AR. Formerly of Meta, formerly of Apple, and America Online. Was part of the layoffs recently. So I am the organizer of these panels, and let me introduce my 2 friends here. Craig, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so my name is Craig Yu. I'm a associate professor of computer science at George Mason University. So I run a group called Design Computing and Extended Reality, DCXR for short. The goal of our research group is to envision the future of extended reality and how we can apply the technology to change every aspect of our life, like the way we work, the way we entertain, the way we communicate. So more specifically, we are working on computer graphics, AI-driven techniques to help enhance the experience of virtual reality and extended reality. Very recently, we have some projects like SIGGRAPH, talking about how we can adapt augmented reality storytelling to different environments. So maybe this is an experience that you will have in 5-10 years from now when the technologies become mature. So I'm happy to share my insights about the future.
And
Hi, my name is Jordan Higgins. I'm a human-centered engineer lead at a company called MITRE, where we do a lot of engineering of prototypes and proofs of concepts for federal research. Also, I'm an adjunct professor at George Mason University, where I teach design. I started out designing websites in the 90s and actually started using VRML then, and was kind of obsessed with the idea of virtual spaces that people could share together. I originally wanted to do that for music groups. I was a music major and thought it would be a cool way to play music with my friends. And then I learned what bandwidth was and realized that wasn't likely to happen for quite a while. But so yeah, my interest in VR now, my background's primarily in UX, design, human factors, and very interested in how, thinking about spatial computing as a sort of another mode of computing that complements what we do now, how we will use it to learn, how we'll use it to collaborate with each other, how we'll use it to create things, all sorts of, I think, cool applications that we're really starting to see, become accessible to more people now than really ever before.
Thank you. We're going to be going from some questions I have for the next half hour, 40 minutes or so, and at that point we're going to open up to QA questions from the audience. Feel free to ask questions in the middle of it if it's on the topic, but otherwise wait to the end and we'll answer your questions then. Thank you. Let's start off with a big one. What's more important in the future, AR or VR? Oh, by the way, everyone know what VR is? Virtual Reality 360. AR is augmented reality. MR is a marketing term for AR, and XR is, there's 5 definitions, and there's a whole bunch of other ones. There's 2 main families. One is VR, when you're completely immersed in it, and AR, where in some ways the computer-generated information is on the real reality. And which do you think is going to be more important in the future?
I think it depends, of course, because virtual reality and extended reality, virtual reality and augmented reality, they are designed for different purposes, right? So if you are talking about VR, you are talking about immersing the user in a completely simulated environment that is separate from the real world, and it is good for some applications, like training applications. If you want the trainee to immerse in a totally different environment, right? So virtual reality will be good for that. Gaming, if you want to send a person to a totally different world, right, to experience something, virtual reality will be that. But that said, augmented reality will have some very important applications in the real world, right? So for example, if you want to train someone to do something on the job site, right? So you don't want to separate the person completely from the world. You want him or her to be able to still see the colleagues, everything in their workplace. So augmented reality will be for that. If you want annotations, augmentation on top of the real-world experience, like, for example, popping up wayfinding hints in a museum, popping up annotations in the gallery museum. So AR will be that. So I would say there are exciting opportunities and applications for both sides.
So you don't think there's one that's going to be more important than the other?
No, not really.
Okay.
Personally, yeah.
Jordan?
Yeah, to build off that, I think it really is going to be driven by use case. And one of the things that we've seen really emerging is more adoption of the term mixed reality, with the idea like when people started talking about mixed reality with the HoloLens. Microsoft had this sort of vision of, there being sort of a reality spectrum where there's, at the one end we've got the world as we know it now, and as we kind of turn the dial up, we increasingly enhance the physical world up to the point where we completely replace it in entirely virtual, and anywhere in between. So, based on what we're doing in testing these devices with actual users, I'm also finding a lot of people really finding the mixed reality, the pass-through, like being able to kind of see digital content and 3D spatial content in the world with them, to be more comfortable, the kind of reporting for completely immersive environments. There's definitely some benefits for like training and when completely replacing the physical world, but in terms of a lot of activities that people are doing in their day-to-day lives, and I think Steve, you were talking earlier about how where this technology really grows is when we do something in a way that's better than the way we did it before, where when we don't want to go back to doing something the previous way.
I use the old school term killer app.
Yeah.
Microcomputers like the Apple II and PC were not successful, and they came out with VisiCalc, a spreadsheet. No one had ever done that before. And the same way the Macintosh was not successful until we had desktop publishing and graphics like that. I've yet to see a killer app for the VR, AR, and we need it desperately.
Yeah, well, and I think what we're going to see as a trend here, and we're seeing this now. The newer headsets, and we're going to talk about, I think, a lot about hardware, but we're seeing mixed reality used to describe these headsets because they provide both of these modes in one device that can respond to what someone's trying to do. And yeah, we'll talk about some of those capabilities.
Okay, well, one of the distinctions between augmented reality is the difference between pass-through augmented reality, which is either wearing the glasses that have cameras so they can see what's around you, or using your iPhone, or to have clear glasses, which I sometimes call the Tony Stark experience, HoloLens and such like that. Which do you think is the future one that's going to be more positive? I have some real problems with the pass-through for both the social. You're not going to want to wear one of these things in public. On the other hand, the glasses technology is not quite here yet for what level we want it to be. It looks like Google Glass, which was not a success.
Right, like definitely the glasses form factor will probably have better consumer adoption, but we're seeing some high-end devices now. There's a company named called Varjo that makes a headset with the pass-through, where their engineers are using it to literally experiment with different conditions while they're driving test cars. They're prototyping different control layouts in real time, and the visual fidelity between real world and the digital enhanced cars that they're driving or the things they're projecting on the road is incredibly good. So for those applications, it enables engineers to more rapidly prototype things at lower cost than they were able to previously, and get insights that they weren't able to, like with built-in eye tracking. And for those uses, that's really going to drive it.
Those aren't very consumer oriented.
Right, exactly. Like they're also extremely expensive. So, but it's another one of those that's a killer app for auto designers though, and researchers. Mm-hmm. But they're not going to care as much about what they're wearing on their heads as much as a consumer would.
This is one of our speakers, John. What do you think of the difference between AR, VR?
Yes.
That's okay.
So definitely, I think there are different challenges with the different technologies. Like if you're talking about glass-based augmented reality, well, the challenges I see is rendering side, especially if you have strong background light, right? Mm-hmm. So in a outdoor environment, you have strong sunlight. If you want to project some virtual things on top of the real world, it's going to be hard because the strong background light will wash out whatever you project, right? So I think this is still a big challenge. So when my students try to use the Microsoft HoloLens for doing augmented reality outdoor, he needs to put on the sunglasses right? So as to dim the background light in order to do the projection successfully. So
He's wearing sunglasses over AR glasses.
yeah, over AR glasses, right? To basically shade the background, right? But that said, I feel that in general, especially for layman users, it's easier to convince people who have never tried augmented reality or virtual reality before to put on the glass-based headset, because the person feels safer, feels more comfortable, because he or she knows that he can still see whatever happening in the real world, right? Rather than completely being separated from the real world, right? So it's more user-friendly in some sense.
It's also safer. We were getting stories of people running into things with VR glasses on, and can you imagine when we're outside doing that? That's going to be a real issue. You know, we have enough problems with people walking around like this, completely enclosed.
Yeah, as I always say, AR is where you miss the bus. VR is where you get hit by the bus because you didn't see it coming.
By the way, this is John Nelson, a longtime software developer.
Hi there, all.
And
Someone
who needs to watch.
I was going to bring my Quest, but
one of the reasons that AR, VR is going to be a possible divide is the area of nausea. If you don't know, we're aware of it, 20% or so of the people get nausea in VR in a motion application. 10% of the people out there, and these stats are pretty solid, are nauseated in any situation, which includes my family, for example. They don't like VR. AR, though, does not have this problem nearly as much. Is this going to be a big difference? Because I hate to have the VR and AR be part of a school criterion and have kids limited and not be able to do it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think.
Can we solve the problem of nausea? Oh, you think so?
It depends on the experience you talk about. Like for virtual reality, it's going to be much harder. For AR, I don't have the, I didn't do research in this area very deeply, but from my personal experience, yes, I think that AR tends to give less nausea, probably because the user can still perceive the real world, see the real world. So the difference between the perception and what he or she is doing right now is not that big compared to like using a VR experience where you may like give the user a totally different locomotion experience compared to what he or she is actually behaving. So that's why I see like, you know, for AR, the motion sickness is not that severe.
Yeah, I remember when we first started working with the HoloLens, one of my favorite terms in this whole business too, we sought to avoid holographic turbulence. And this basically meant when we had 3D holograms, and that was the first time I was like, wow, we're working in the future. This is, but basically, if we're projecting two versions of a 3D object or representation on different screens to both eyes, if they're not in sync with each other, that's the brain really has a problem with that. Our brain expects the world to work a certain way, and when it doesn't, we get headaches, we get motion sickness.
We get seasick.
Yeah, and actually, as more people are getting into these devices, we're actually learning an awful lot too about what the different predictors and factors are. So, right off the bat, like interpupillary distance, the ability to kind of set, to adjust the displays to optimize for what looks clearest, that helps with a lot of the discomfort right off the bat.
Which is one of the really interesting things with the eye tracking, because when you put the whole Quest Pro on, it actually tells you you're not focused right. It tracks your eyes, and that was a fantastic feature.
And so so the devices themselves, and the HoloLens too, and I think magically can calibrate themselves to your eyes too, like the between having better hardware that can run things and reduce that risk of turbulence, developers knowing the guidelines to prevent.
We had a lot of people getting sick in the very early days because truthfully the resolution and the frame rate wasn't good. We've solved that problem.
So I think that we'll be able to increase these things. There is one of my favorite VR games right now. It's Warfighters. It's basically a World War I flight simulator that's super realistic. I can't stop playing it, even though it makes me very ill. But I also feel like maybe that adds to the realism. Like if I were flying a World War I, like fighter plane, I'd probably feel very ill too. I've tried it. Like there's all sorts of little tricks too. Like you can put a fan on to like blow air in your face so that it feels your brain kind of feels a little bit better. You can chew on ginger, stuff like that. That also may help. No, but I can't stop playing it.
The human brain has had millions and millions of years of evolution to cope with these data fusion tasks. You know, syncing up what you see with what you hear, with what you feel, especially with the inner ear. And I think that's probably, although I'm pretty much an amateur compared to you guys, I think that's part of the problem is the distortion or the what's the word I'm looking for? The incoherence of the various sources of data because they don't sync up with what learning has taught them over the millions of years. There's a thing in VR called cross-modal plasticity, which is basically the data fusion of what you see, what you feel, what you smell, what you taste, what you touch. And this nausea is, in my opinion, the backside of that. It's cross-modal incoherence.
That's a $10 word. I like to call 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah, well, that's...
I'll explain what this means.
That is
The
essentially...
more senses you fool and the more senses you have involved, the more immersive you actually feel. It's better to have 3D sound around you. It's better to have haptics, which leads into my next question. We're going to start seeing more senses being fooled.
Right.
When John and I went to the Void, they actually had places in the Star Wars experiences where we got heat projected at us to make us feel like it was lava. They had the sulfur smell. Are we going to start seeing better haptics? Are we going to start seeing, there are literally 3 companies that I know of out there that are trying to do a smellogram type thing that goes on the glasses that actually produce smells in the middle of the game, because smell is one of those things that's hardwired to your brain.
And they're all doing more and more devices to produce haptics.
Yes. Do you think we will start seeing these more? What would you find the interesting ones?
Well, I know that. So there's a researcher in this field named Bob Stone. People, he's been on this sort of lifelong quest, I think, to find a way to accurately and safely recreate the smell of jet fuel for a training application. But precisely because for training applications in particular, and I think that's what's driving a lot of the multi-sensory engagement application. We form memories, based on all of our senses. But the more senses we combine, the more realistic it is, the more powerful that memory formation can be, and that's what makes VR a great training tool. It accelerates, time to proficiency and retention of information, and smell in particular. I think like smell. It's Our other senses are on different parts of the brain, but then the sense of smell is like kind of directly hardwired. And I think that's like an old school survival thing. Like that was our primary way of detecting oh wait, the house is on fire. We probably that may take priority over other things. But I think that's going to drive it.
That brings up an issue with user interfaces. You're describing a more detailed user interface with smell and taste and touch that's more intuitive to the human mind. So if you smell jet fuel, something's wrong because you don't usually have to deal with jet fuel and it signals a danger. Whereas user interfaces on a lot of devices have been made simpler and simpler and more abstract. So instead of the smell and taste and feel of jet fuel entering the cockpit, you get a warning light that just says, bam, warn, and
One of the haptic
clocks.
devices that are coming out right now literally blows air in your face at different times, and that is incredibly useful for warning people of things, or it gives the impression you hit something and such, and it fools the brain into thinking you were touched when you're not.
So virtual reality and probably augmented reality too are most effective when they are intuitive to the human brain.
You're going to say something, Craig?
Yeah, interestingly, I have seen research demos at SIGGRAPH from Japan using the smells, simulated smells, to fool humans, actually for good purpose. So basically, they are trying to fool humans, in the demo, they fool the user that he is eating chocolate cookies, while actually he is actually eating plain cookies. So the chocolate smell is simulated, but the person wears a headset, and the
Augmented
visualization is a chocolate cookie. So the person, of course, they are trying to do research and see if the person can get successfully fooled by the system, and the answer is yes. So this is for good purpose, right? So you can generate simulation like that in order to help people with diets and so on, right? So this is an interesting demo I see.
I can imagine doing that on the International Space Station or Antarctica, where the food supply is actually limited and trying to keep the people interested. You had a question about this? You raised your hand.
Yeah, it's an on-topic question, but so they're making advances with hand pass-through versus like controllers, right?
Yes.
What do you think's more?
That was my next question, actually. You jumped ahead on the list. Which do you like? Hand controllers, and especially with now that we have the controllers which can work anywhere with cameras on them, or hand gestures. Let me explain the change of that. We had controllers before. Your camera, you could see where they were positionally, and that was where you knew them. But if you put them down here, you couldn't see them with the cameras. The new controllers from the Quest have the cameras on the controllers, so they can know where they are positionally in the room, regardless of where you are in relationship to it. And that's made a big change, because otherwise you had to have things out here, and you got what's called gorilla arm. Your arms got really tired, which is one of the problems with gestures. What do you guys think about this?
My thinking is that if we have good haptic feedback paired with the control, like the hand gesture-based input method, that would be ideal, right? So my thinking is that, so when we use our hands to interact with objects in the real world, we always feel the objects, right? That's why it's easier for us, because we can use the feeling to judge whether we are doing something successfully, right? Versus like if you are just manipulating some objects virtually without any haptic feedback, basically you are like manipulating with air. It's really hard for you to judge whether you do something precisely.
Well, are you talking about the wristband haptics and?
I'm talking about like the haptic feedback, like the tactile feedback.
The gloves.
The
Okay.
tactile
Like
feedback, the gloves,
to the
basically.
finger level.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I would say if you have control, like hand gesture-based interaction plus correct tactile feedback, that would be very powerful.
What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, definitely that. Like that. You know, one of the things that can be, like from a human comfort level, that hand gestures can be cool for like broad motion things. Like Minority Report, I think if anybody's seen that movie, set a lot of expectations of being able to kind of, just send things all the. And then one of the things, so a lot of us who were inspired by that movie started to build interfaces like that, and we realized pretty quickly. It gets tiring really quickly, right?
Extremely.
Right, and the other thing that we kind of find too is that for things that require really fine motor control, sometimes the controllers. So for anything like VR painting apps or VR sculpting apps, where like we're actually able to build 3D models in fine detail. Sometimes that level of precision, but what you're saying, what I think would be really interesting is like if we get to the point where that haptic feedback is precise enough, where we don't need it could do the same thing that the controller is doing, then yeah, like if when we get to that point, that's going to be a whole nother world.
Sure.
Having sensors that detect your fingers and hands in 3 space is going to be a little tricky, but they are doing it now. I'm interested in this because of accessibility issues. I have a hard time holding and manipulating a controller, and this bizarre, unintuitive set of buttons and toggles and switches. Whereas if I could just use my hands, or for playing games that require locomotion, forward, backward, left, and right. There's a difference between mouse move, what you see, 3D OF, and 6D OF, which is what you see with mouse move and forward, backward, laterally moving. And that's very hard to do with controllers. I mean, you can do it, but it's an unintuitive, complex array of buttons and switches and toggles that you have to
You have a lot to learn.
You have a lot to learn.
We have a lifetime of kind of how we.
Why couldn't you use foot pads for movement, or dare I say it, like a treadmill? And you've seen those contrivances where you're standing and you're running, but you're running in place. I forget what those are called.
I will have to say in response to this, the more techie we get with the haptic gloves and all that, the less people are going to adopt it. Having your free-form motion, not having to do these, there is some big advantage to that. Let's talk a little bit about what we have out there. 60% of the market is Quest right now. A good percentage of the remaining market is PSVR, which in a way is almost its own category because that's almost exclusively games, okay? And it's tethered and it doesn't have a lot of the controllers that the traditional VR does. The rest of the market, while really impressive, is rather a small percentage. Do you think there's a chance for them to jump up and become more popular, or is it a little too late? Would you recommend anyone here buy anything other than the Quest 2 right now for consumer use?
For consumer use, I think the Quest is probably the most, it's my go-to recommendation.
Right.
I think right now I'd probably, I know a lot of people are waiting for, there's a Quest 3 that's rumored to be coming out probably later this year, I think. But I mean, I don't know if anybody knows exactly when. But
well, that's the future one.
Yeah,
you don't tell people to wait.
I know a fair number of people that are waiting for that. But like, if you wanted a VR headset today, Quest 2 would be my go-to to tell people, just because it's, in terms of when we think about the again the friction of getting used to a new way of computing and a new experience, the Quest I think probably has about the best experience for that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there's something good about having a big user base. Like you can experience some VR experiences with other people using the same device. Like there are multiplayer VR games that you can try out on the Quest. I think like
much larger library,
unique experience that you want to have in when you first try out a VR. Right? You want to see like your friend joining the same experience, and you can go on some special adventure together in the virtual space. Yeah.
I would say now, yes, but 10 years from now, no. It's like the decision you made to buy your first computer back when the Atari and Commodore platforms were the only game in town, and then the Macintosh came along, and everybody just dropped what they were doing and bought a Mac.
Well, then let's talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room. What were you going to say, Jordan?
I had a quick question. Has anybody here? So I know that there is a new device that came out this year, the Pico 4.
Yes.
That really has the Quest 2 square in its sights. Has anybody here tried that one? Is it?
I have to say that's a marketing failure because people don't know about it. It's really not well known. I think that it's more marketed overseas than it was here in the United States.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
Well, first to market isn't always the last one to run.
Yeah.
I think the Quest is a great platform to train and educate the public on VR, what it is, what it can do, and if you keep up with it, and if you're an aficionado of that sort of thing, that's fine. But if you're going to expect to, learn what's going to be really useful, I guess it is like the home computer days. They weren't the best machines in the world, but they got you introduced to them.
Well, let's talk about a couple specific platforms. The 800-pound gorilla in the room, of course, is Apple with their predicted AR device. They just had a major leak about 4 days ago. You might hate Apple, but you got to admit they have impact in the industry. So do you expect them to be coming out, and what impact will that be? Because if they pops out like that, that's going to have a change.
So I love Apple, and I've been waiting patiently for this headset, probably more patiently than any other piece of technology I've been excited about. I do think that when they do release it, then the industry is it will be seen as a pivotal moment in how XR is perceived as a technology. Similar, one of the things that we often like when we think about strategy roadmaps is a lot of what's been happening with XR or AR, VR, whatever we're using. But it's very similar to what happened when the phone came out or when the iPhone came out, right? And it was the iPhone that really changed. For the first couple of years, a lot of people were kind of like, well, the iPhone's.
There were smartphones before the iPhone.
Yeah, it's nice, but I need my keyboard, right? I was working on Capitol Hill at the time where nobody wanted to give up their BlackBerry. And then over time, the sheer usefulness of the platform, so I think there's going to be, a lot of confidence in sort of just spatial computing in general, but I also think that that's going to take some time too. Like I imagine that when the device comes out, it's going to be extremely expensive. It's going to be, Apple sort of, they're very good at kind of putting out a new product as sort of a premium thing that also kind of generates hype around it, and then it gets more accessible with, different levels of models over time. It'll be interesting to see how they approach bringing that to market. And
The rumors say it's going to be a pass-through glass. No, excuse me, not pass-through glasses. Clear glasses of that type.
Yeah.
Everyone we know who's manufacturing that, it's expensive. So you're probably right.
Does anybody remember the Palm Pilot? Yeah, and do you still use a Palm Pilot? or the, as Jordan says,
I believe there's one upstairs in the computer museum.
Yeah, or the BlackBerry, which was everybody loved the BlackBerry until the iPhone came along and overcame it. Will the Apple AR glasses, if they do materialize? I think Jordan is correct that they will be expensive at first and they'll be for early adopters, but as the public gets used to it and that mode of doing things, probably it will catch on just like the iPhone did.
I'm going to have to disagree with this. Apple knows the price breaks, and they also know the disaster of the Google Glass and the HoloLens being overpriced.
Yeah.
And they haven't been very impressed with the Pro for the overpricing of it too. So I think they may be becoming more reasonable than you expect. Now, not Quest level reasonable, but not,
But like the Quest, it was preceded by the Go, which was a pretty low cost, low functionality.
We talked about that earlier.
Yeah, and they worked their way up in cost. Apple may do the same. They may start out with an inexpensive version and then up to the Pro.
The other end of the spectrum, of course, is the Sony PSVR. Sony has announced that VR is very important for their future, and for a while, the VR device was the #1 VR device in the world. They sold it until Quest caught up with them. They sold 8 million or so, but it is very game-oriented with none of the controllers or things you expect of VR. Is that going to have any impact in the future? Will we see more just only game-only machines?
I think that's not true because
Okay.
Meta has committed to their metaverse, and they're apparently putting large resources into that.
No, but I'm talking about, are we going to see anyone else besides that, besides Sony?
Well, that's as a metaphor.
Okay.
They aren't just games oriented. They're introducing the public to the whole genre of VR and collaboration and remote work and that stuff. So.
Any other comments on that? Okay. Let's see what the other questions we have here.
there's a question in the back.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did I? Yes, sir. We weren't planning to immediately, but we're getting closer to the end. We can start taking questions. Telepresence and teleeducation. What do you think about this? Is this going to be one of the possible killer apps for the AR, VR glasses?
Yeah, I think so.
Especially since we had COVID and everyone got used to Zoom, and they want something better than Zoom.
Exactly, that's how we pitch our recent project actually. So, my research lab is working on using virtual reality for robot teleoperation, and exactly we pitch a story because using the recent situation of the pandemic, right? So like you may have some situation where you want to teleoperate a robot to handle some scenario where the human may not be able to get access, right? Like a
robotic wall.
Disaster scenario,
Yeah.
or somewhere like remote, right? So I think this is really promising in terms of the applications it can bring, right? So like recently we worked on a project. We let a user using the Oculus Quest to control a robot's arm remotely. So we did an experiment. My student controlled a robot at the Taiwan side, and the robot can set up the table for a lab space in the Taiwan, and we showed that it works. And especially, I think that the improvement in the networking side, the bandwidth, that we
world
anticipate,
bandwidth, yeah.
the 5G, 6G would enhance, a lot of applications at this side, because you can stream the virtual, like the remote environment over, either as like point cloud or even like 3D reconstructed model, so that the teleoperation will be much easier compared to before, where you can only stream like video, 2D, basically 2D video, for the control part.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a strong use case for for specific types of applications. There's another really good one with the HoloLens where so there's an example, a very specific example, doing bridge inspections, infrastructure inspections that traditionally required people with a lot of expertise to travel on site and do dangerous things like go off the side of a building, take pictures, then go back, analyze, discuss. They're using it now for things like having experts be anywhere in the world. A drone can go up, do a scan of a building, create a very high quality digital twin of that bridge, and then these experts can just kind of basically sit at their desk, put a HoloLens on, and then collaboratively explore, view it from different angles, blow it up at different levels of scale, completely different way of doing it than they would have before in less time. Those sort of like presence applications are going to drive it in the short term. Longer term, it kind of, one of my primary areas of interest is basically making team meetings less painful. This whole year of and also my regular Dungeons and Dragons group too, right? Like we kept playing over Zoom, for 2 years. But when we were back in person, I realized, just how much of the mannerisms that we missed, the sheer, all the little things about being in the same room. Those sort of things, I think, are going to be very powerful drivers when the technology can capture those elements of presence, which Meta is doing a very good job with. And I imagine Apple will be doing a good job with that as well, too. But right now, just based on kind of what I've been doing as pilots with people, it's just not ubiquitous enough now. We're not fluent with these headsets and this technology the same way we are with our iPads or with Zoom. It takes too long and it's too expensive, and there's a lot of things that are going to need to overcome. But like everything in this industry, I would say it's 5 to 10 years off. I think that's the standard answer when something's going to happen.
Let me ask the general question. Forget 10 years. That's too long.
Okay.
5 years. What are we going to see in 5 years that's going to change things or going to make a difference?
I think I'd like to take that one. Jordan had mentioned digital twins, and the latest thing nowadays is the replication of physical objects in the digital world and the VR world. So you can model, measure in real time using Internet of Things the status and the health of all kinds of objects, like supply and demand for countries, dock workers, dockage, transportation, energy, electricity, all kinds of measures around the planet, or municipalities, or even people. Internet of Things promises to give real-time measurements to the health of the human body, and you could then model a digital twin using those measurements and have remote surgery done to your, first tested with your digital twin and diagnosed, and the therapy recommended, and then do some kind of remote surgery.
Johns Hopkins was one of the pioneers in this area that started doing 3D printing of the internal organs. They quit doing that and they took over with VR.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Right. So digital twins is a really fascinating area of endeavor.
well, a lot of that's going to have to depend of having ways of scanning. We're going to be able to. Someone talked about the other day about scanning a chair being very difficult, and ridiculously difficult, and we're getting points where we have now cameras that walk around the chair and it gets scanned in 3D.
But you could scan a room and count the number of chairs and determine whether or not you have enough chairs or too many, or the placement of the chairs is inefficient for your task.
Some drones are being flown through buildings in order to get the layout of the building and have 3D models for it. It's being popular for firefighting.
There's another application for digital twins, and that is in entertainment. You could have sensors connected to football players. We discussed this last evening.
Yeah.
And record the movements and the game that you're watching, and then replicate that game with you as the football player, as the player in a future game or a future modeling.
Actually, that's being done right now by the NFL, and it's not for the users, it's for the quarterbacks, so they can run the game over again and see where the mistakes they made, and they put on VR glasses, and they get to see players that they couldn't see on the field to know, hey, he was in that position, and I could have thrown to him. So there was an article about that about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, so there are numerous applications for digital twins.
Let's go down to Jordan. Jordan, you go next. What do you think is here in 5 years? What's the important changes that we're going to get?
So I do think that the next generation of the Quest is going to help reduce that friction of people onboarding. I think I think we're going to see more people with these headsets. Like, I think when we asked at the beginning of the session how many people had a VR headset, about maybe a third of the room, I think, raised their hand. I expect that if we do this panel in 5 years, I think you're going to see a lot more hands go up, right? I think that well, especially in 5 years, like that adoption's going to be.
It's like the iPhone. Who had the iPhone
Yeah.
in the early days, and then.
And I think you're going to be able to kind of say, I think you're going to have a better sense of what the killer apps are. Like, as people start to similar to what happened with the iPhone, right? Like you're going to. Once people actually start using it, and users will almost always, as an interaction designer, I love to think that I know the best way for people to accomplish a task. But the reality is, people find their own paths, right? And we generally sometimes have to catch up by looking at how people actually use things once they're in real people's hands.
What do you think, Craig? What's going to happen in 5 years?
I actually think in 5 years, so the VR teleoperation side will find much more application, because the network is really going to, the network infrastructure is going to be able to support very helpful VR teleoperation because of the better streaming and more interactive applications that will be possible. So yeah, that's my thinking about it. Yeah.
I think at this point, next year we're going to have this be about an hour and a half session because I think we could keep asking questions for quite a long time for it. We haven't touched the area of development of software going to be easier to write in the future. We haven't touched the areas of ethics of using VR, which is starting to become an issue, or the fact that we can use VR for medicine, for therapy. But we just don't have time to go in these areas. So let's open up to Q&A, all right? You had your hands up first. What's your question?
Public education.
Very important.
AR and VR, I believe is going to just become a tool.
I didn't ask the questions in that area because we had a talk about that on Friday, specifically for AR and VR. And the YouTube video will be available. Yes. Craig was here for that. The video should be up in a month or two. Go watch that one of those. Yeah. Very important. Teaching, we talked about that, the fact that we're going to have some teachers resist it and some teachers not sure, is it acceptable for what ages and everything. But I think we've done this before with computers and other technologies. Teachers have been adapting more than almost any profession I know of to technology. It's going to be...
This is the last one. And I'm thinking about the large, what is it, marginal school systems.
Digital divide, yes.
Without a lot of, families or challenges. And you have these large classrooms. And that might do away with the impersonalization. Large classrooms where the students can get the individual teacher, even though there's 40 people in the room. And I should have been to the other, and I didn't know.
Telepresence. Yeah. Craig, you want to talk about this or no?
How much better things are going to get? It's going to get better.
No, it's not going to get better immediately because we're going to have to learn how to do it right. But over time, it will get better. There is no doubt we're going to stumble at first.
I want to share some experience on the VR for the education side. I think VR will be very helpful for sympathy, empathy type of training. So actually we worked on a project before where we created a simulated virtual classroom environment. And that simulation is very helpful for training teacher, in a sense that like we let the teacher in training to get embodied into a virtual student character, right? So the teacher can take the perspective of the student to experience what's the classroom environment is like, right? And if there is some situation happening, like bullying or discrimination type of thing, the trainee can get a first-person perspective of how it feels, and so that that sense of feeling can greatly reinforce like the thinking of the trainee, and so that like he or she is much more aware of the situation, and also like think about how he would have handled the situation. Yeah.
Let's go to some other questions here. Who else had one? Gentlemen?
Start with a comment. Even well before VR, I would get car sick reading in the car. So I'm wondering what you see in the future in terms of not on the device side, but on the biological side. Are there medical devices, medical research, medicine itself?
Medicine itself. Talk about the stuff that was at CS last year that was they are adapting the stuff for seasickness to work for virtual, the electronic gadgets that give you a zap and the medicines. Am I the only one who paid? Okay.
I think you're the only one who
CE last year, there were several booths that had dealt with exactly that, and they were taking the technology for seasickness, both pills and Dramamine types, as well as the wristwatch you wear that gives you a little electric shock that apparently helps you not get seasick. So people are aware of this, and they're working on it.
Jordan, you can probably talk to that about the various accessibility checklist items that you have to sign up to deploy an app.
Yeah, I think there's things to like get stuff in the MetaQuest store or in the Steam store. I think has a lower barrier, but there are like some best practices in trying to design apps and to include features that account for different levels of accessibility and user comfort. In terms of the biological side of it, I don't know that I'm sure it's out there. I don't know that I've heard a lot about like is there, like Dramamine for VR or something like that, or is there something that we can like medicine that we can take? I actually don't know. I imagine somebody's been looking at if there's medical interventions that would help with that, but I think a lot of the emphasis has been on one, just kind of understanding the range of how humans may respond to this technology, and then how can the software and the hardware be adapted to optimize, for the broadest range of use cases possible. I imagine, that there'll be some use cases where, that there's just going to always be some level of discomfort or disconnect.
A roller coaster ride is a roller coaster ride.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of thing that I think, but that's where I think it also gets interesting in terms of, being able to, maybe we can find ways to shift the perception of the experience to make it more comfortable in a way that we really couldn't in the physical world, like slowing down a roller coaster ride experience, so that it's still somewhat thrilling, but maybe it's not moving as fast, so it's more, sort of one example. But yeah, and we talked a little bit about how the hardware can, as it's getting more advanced, it can actually detect your IPD distance and adjust itself. I know one of the other things on the horizon is likely being able to correct for prescription. Like if you get your eyes checked now, like they have machines that can tell what your prescription is. I think one of the next steps in that is going to be having headsets where, instead of having to, kind of adjust for space to put in your eyeglasses, the displays themselves may shift to accommodate your biological, eye, conditions and prescriptions and things like that.
Okay, what's the other questions we have here? Gentleman in the red.
It's funny that you mentioned the eye correction things. I was going to ask, is there anything over the next 5 years that you see that needs to be brand new, invented to apply VR, or is it just need more funding to improve the hardware, to improve X? Something that needs to be invented.
Whoever takes the question, repeat the question so people can hear it.
Yeah, so your question is, in 5 years, 10 years, is there any breakthrough in virtual reality that we will see, right? I actually think that lots of machine learning AI techniques will come into place into creating new tools for virtual reality development, right? And so, for example, for the motion sickness problem, I have seen research papers where researchers train machine learning model to predict if a virtual reality experience will induce motion sickness on the person, right? So, if it is possible, if you have such data, right, like you have lots of data where people have motion sickness or don't have motion sickness, and you can train the AI to find out the correlation between motion sickness and visual input, right? So this sort of model, so this is just one application. I think there are other applications of AI and machine learning for improving the virtual reality. And another thing is NLP. Lots of people talk about natural language processing. I think that would be very promising for virtual reality, right? So think about in the reality, we interact with people mostly verbally, right? And in virtual reality, we don't still have that yet. So you see a virtual guy coming up, you can't really talk to him or ask him about something or let him show you something because the AI is missing, right? So if we can apply natural language processing techniques into virtual environments and enhance the interaction there, I think that would make it greatly bridge the gap between virtual reality and real reality, right?
I mean, it's basically going to be like the holodeck, right?
Yeah.
Like the start. Like we're going to be able to kind of, like right now, if I wanted to go create a VR environment that's let's just say a simulation of a operating room, that would still take me, even with some of the tools, to kind of do this in VR, it would still take a lot of time. We look at the AI image generation tools now, we're not that far off from being able to kind of say, computer, create me an operating room, that's representative of Midwestern, mid-sized hospital. And then it'll know enough to kind of create a high fidelity prototype of that.
Especially with the chat GB that just came out.
Yeah.
Using that technology. Voice is very important. The
extremely
Quest,
Yep.
I no longer use the menus inside the Quest to manipulate it to go around the areas. I do it verbally because that was done with the last update, and that has made a major difference.
It sounds like the nausea problem is sort of like the uncanny valley. It's not quite realistic enough, but it becomes too realistic. And if you want total immersion in VR, you may have to accept the impact. I mean, if you had a holodeck which simulated exactly the experience of a roller coaster ride, you're going to get nauseous if you're nauseous on roller coaster rides. There's probably no avoiding that.
Software developers are aware of this, and they are aware of the fact that making their customers nauseated is not probably a good idea. So depending on the app, some of the apps allow you to teleport versus using joystick motion for the people who are sensitive. Software developers and there are other tricks. We could go into detail about that, but...
And I would also stress the need for more than software developers to look at the problem. I
Yes.
think psychologists and
We had some questions over here.
medical people.
Yeah, so I have a question about the future of or your thoughts on the future of the mainstream VR market and Meta's place in it. So, with the previous few years, Meta's bought up a lot of software companies and technology companies, like stuff for VR gloves and stuff like that. And recently, a lot of their biggest purchases have been very scrutinized by the federal government. And recently, John Carmack left and left made very clear remarks as to how bureaucratic it can be and how hard it is to make proper changes and how they're going to make all our own decisions.
Is there a question in that?
Yeah. So, do you think a lot of the market is kind of anchored on Meta, and do you think if they fail, or do you think they have the potential to fail?
Someone other than me better take that question.
I mean, they're taking big risks, and they're spending more. I think second only to Apple, who can afford to sell them. So I mean, they're taking huge risks. So I mean, I think of course they're likely to that there's always that possibility of failure. I also think, though, that they're also doing some of the pioneering research in things like accessibility and in user comfort, in technical capabilities. I think John Carmack actually, if I remember correctly, he came out with a Facebook post where he kind of put out the whole statement because he felt like it was being taken a little out of context. Like the challenge that he was having there was kind of his own, his priority from trying to squeeze every ounce of performance out of the device, whereas Meta's focus may have been, and this is just my interpretation of this. I'm not speaking for anybody, but what I was reading into that was that Meta is also looking a lot at the social aspect of VR and collaboration in VR and
The aesthetics.
the aesthetics, the overall experience. And if you look at the acquisitions that different companies have been making. So Meta, like I think purchased a display technology. That's again, we're probably not going to see the outputs of that for years. Short answer, I think it's way too early to call VR dead. I think the more it gets out to consumer expectations. Yeah.
Do you think that if for some reason that the downsides their VR department or whatever, would other people be able to fill the vacuum, or do you think it might hurt mainstream VR?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for new players to disrupt what's going on. It's still so rapidly emerging, and there's definitely I think opportunities there. Let me kick that off to anybody else who might want to jump in on this.
A lot of the other companies are putting lots of money in. Meta is the first one, Apple the second one. There are a lot of them out there, Sony. So Meta is the big guy now. Will that stay?
Yeah, but there's definitely going to be very niche opportunities where smaller players are going to enter in. They're going to try things out. They'll probably fail without us ever hearing about them. And then some of them will probably get picked up and purchased.
It would be fair to say that Meta is positive for the VR universe, not suppressing anything.
I think so. Just I look at every time the Quest platform gets updated, there's always something new there that's really pushing the platform forward, I think.
And the industry.
They've been very, very good about like watching how people are using the technology and addressing that with their enhancements.
Technically, it's 2 o'clock right now. We're supposed to shut down, but it also is the last session for this room. So if we can keep going, we don't mind for another.
No,
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. The gentleman in the red, I think has had a question for a long time.
We're going to ask the question. I'm just saying, please, if you want to go ahead, but we're going to keep asking questions, answering questions. Sir.
You all mentioned like some interesting things, like the iPhone came out, and took a while for it to become the device, and Palm was like the device, but then you got the phone. What do you think will take to kind of take the spotlight a little bit around Meta and the Quest? What is it that the device has to be able to become the big player in this space?
Probably the killer app or a paradigm shift.
Or a significant break in price and performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like somebody comes out with a device that's as performant as the Quest, has access to as rich an ecosystem of experiences as the Quest, but is $100 cheaper.
I'm going to have to say that's going to be difficult because even if you come out with something that's incredibly new and interesting like that, they don't have the software base.
Right.
And the software is what runs these things for all computer stuff. And it's good software that makes it popular. And
Well, that means solving a problem.
yeah.
So I will say that's why I personally, one of my things I'm most passionate about, I think, is WebXR. So the idea that the metaverse isn't something that has been branded or coined by Meta. It's something that's an evolution of the internet as we know it. And I think I kind of keep chasing that high that I had in the 90s when I first got on the web in the first place, with just that wow, like suddenly I'm browsing a website that's based in Japan or one that's in
You want to explain
Switzerland.
WebXR real quick about
So WebXR is basically a web standards-based way of deploying augmented and virtual reality experiences in any web browser environment. So essentially, you can code something once, and with the right level of components, it'll work on my phone, it'll work in a headset, it'll work in basically any web browser that supports these WebXR standards.
If you use Unity to program something and you try to run it for both Oculus and Vive and everything, there's major changes in between. So it's not easy to program once and have it across the board. Web is one of the solutions for that.
So WebXR is basically the functional or moral equivalent of XML. HTML.
Yeah, it is a
actually used to be
the spatial web.
Actually, it used to be called HTML VR, and that they thought that was too abbreviated.
Think of websites as physical space or virtual spaces that can be shared versus, traditional 2D, even, dynamic content.
There is a Beat Saber clone out there that runs on WebVR, which in my opinion is actually better than Beat Saber.
Yeah, it's the ability to create high fidelity experiences in the web browser. Same challenge that you have with traditional web applications. I don't have access to the whole library of what a device can do because I have to go through that browser layer. But with each iteration, it does get more and more performant. And this is actually similar to like what John Carmack was saying. I don't necessarily care about squeezing every ounce of performance out of the device. I just want enough performance so that my users don't get sick and they, whatever experience I'm trying to create for them, they're able to get enjoyment about. I almost want them to forget about the technology layer and just be kind of caught up in that experience.
You had a question, sir?
What kind of research is going on right now in what you might call limited reality that is not trying to provide the world in a box on your head, but trying to provide the world that optimizes what you're trying to do?
Well, there's some good research in this area for therapy, for dealing with people with post-traumatic stress syndrome or phobias. The famous one with the person afraid of heights getting near a bridge that starts out being very cartoonish and all the way to that. There is being research. Craig, what research have you seen in limited?
Limited?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't fully understand the question.
One simple example is you have Second Life or OpenSim or any of these virtual worlds, and then Minecraft ate their lunch. And they ate their lunch by providing a limited reality for people to interact with. And so there seems to be a lot of room there for limiting the reality for different reasons. Like when you first learn something, you look at it as a 3D picture. It looks nothing like the engine when you open up the hood. But the limited reality gets you started, and then you can move on to more complicated reality.
Yeah, I think, that's an interesting perspective. Perhaps scoping the degree of freedom would help the adoption of the technology rather than prohibit the adoption. Because for a lot of users, if you expose a user to too many degrees of freedom, it's actually too hard for the person to predict how to use the technology or get used to using the environment. So, like the example you throw out about Minecraft versus Second Life, kind of verify this idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's for like really like the design of these experiences.
Yeah.
Like the first question, like I do a lot on the brainstorming side of this, where we kind of like try to think of like what's something that's actually worth building, right? Like why is this the right thing to build in VR? And we kind of ask like two questions. One's an open-ended one where it's like, okay, if we could give the participants superpowers, like they could fly or they could see through walls or they can have telekinesis, all these things that you could do in this spatial medium that we can't do in real life, what would that add to the experience? And then we like strike it all down by saying, okay, well, why is this better in a VR headset than on a like just say another medium? And then that's where like 9 out of 10 ideas I think kind of end up never getting any further. But so it's really understanding that use case and understanding what are the interaction points before you even start building, because I think a lot of experiences don't connect with users because they do try to do too much.
Well, I was just wanted to add to that. From a gamer standpoint, look at all of the popular 8-bit games. We still play them, and it's because of the gameplay and the ideas and the concepts in the game, not the, NVIDIA RTX umpty-ump graphics processor that can, simulate the real world. Sometimes it's all about the gameplay and the 8-bit world, regardless of its quality.
Some of the chat room and Zooms are trying for a much more cartoonish look, while other ones are trying for a much more realistic look. So I think it's inherent in the system already that we recognize the fact that some people want this type of approach versus others. Some of the more popular games do not look photorealistic at all. They're very abstract in their appearance.
In fact, that's a visual aid because you don't care about the visual detail.
It also actually gives a better chance of not being nauseated in some instances. What's other questions? Sir? I'm sorry, can you speak up a little louder? I can't hear you. Want to take that?
Repeat the question. Well, I think it's if I'm understanding the question is what will it take for game companies to start creating more VR versions of their games? Is that right? So this is a little bit secondhand because I don't work directly in the gaming, or at least the profitable side of the gaming world. But my understanding of it is that it comes down to having the audience and knowing that they'll get return on their investment. Yeah. Which is one of the reasons why the Quest is so popular, why Steam was so popular before, because it became a way that and the Apple Store too, people were willing to tolerate the hoops and the costs of being in one of these main stores because they knew that they would reach an audience that would help them reach profitability. So I think that's at least my understanding of it is you're seeing the big.
To having enough installed base to justify the return on the investment.
Yeah, but that's also why you're seeing a lot of, I think, like smaller studios, right? Right. Or that may be getting backed by the big studios or may have investments from them, but they're riskier. So I'm trying to think who are some of the big
There's also one other impact. Is one of the reasons why PSVR was its popularity is that you could have a AAA company who's doing a game for the PS3 or 4 or 5. And they decide, okay, we'll be willing to spend 10% more to have a VR feature. And that's why we started seeing a large explosion in that area. But that's very unique because you can't do the same thing for the Quest or the Vive,
What about Roblox?
I mean, yeah, Roblox is, they are the one of the 900 pound gorillas, right?
And yet they've fallen, like most growth companies, they've fallen on hard times. Mm-hmm.
One of the surprising ones was Minecraft was extremely late to the ballpark, and I would have thought that would have been an obvious one for VR. Only recently that Minecraft VR become really good or well known.
So I actually haven't tried Minecraft VR. Does everything that makes the 2D Minecraft experience fun, does that translate well into VR?
I haven't tried it either, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'm curious. I
think it also depends on the business model, who's maintaining it, who's marketing it.
Yes, marketing.
Developing.
Do they make enough? Is there enough return on the investment for doing that will justify doing it?
I'm sorry, that's a real games-focused one, and that's not our area of expertise on this panel.
But I think it does come down to a business case, though.
We had some of the guys from last night. Right? We might have been able to answer that.
Yeah, I think it's largely going to be is it worth? For our company's model, does it make sense for us to make this investment? Do we want to be are we doing this to be, first to market or like early adopters in this field? Are we willing to take some losses to, explore this?
And if you're going to take the same amount of resources as a AAA studio, you'll make a lot more money selling it for the consoles or the PC. So we're still a niche market. I mean,
check out. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was like, check out a company called Shell Games.
Yeah.
They're they've been a traditional game company. The founder of the company, Jesse Shell, has written an outstanding book for anybody interested in game design called The Art of Game Design. But they've been making that shift into becoming a premier VR games publisher. So they did I Expect You to Die. If you've ever played that game, it's a great VR game. They just did the Among Us VR port.
That's important.
Which is a fantastic translation of a 2D game, and thinking about the way that happened too, I think you had a big game hit title that they actually hyped up that transition of porting it to VR and creating a version of that game that really took advantage of what makes VR cool. I'm thinking of other companies to look at.
Actually, there's one big thing we have in our advantage. VR is the shiny new tool. And game programmers more than anyone else like shiny new tools. And I know people in the industry, I know they all say, oh, I'm not doing VR right now, but I really wish I was. So we're getting that effect.
Yeah.
I'm sure, of course, the game companies will look at the return on the investment. That's the most important factor. But maybe the another way to think of it is, does VR or AR bring some unique gaming experience that would lead to loss of gamer satisfaction? For example, Pokemon Go, right? Why Pokemon Go is pretty successful, right? So I think it's successful because it's first smartly combined the concept of location-based augmented reality with games, and that's a unique experience it can bring to the world, right?
Majority of the users out there don't use Pokemon Go in AR mode, though. So
That's true. The first thing I do in Pokemon Go is turn off the AR.
Right. But even then, though, like the augmented part of it is the location, not the.
Yeah, they actually had
That's
some
right.
quests and features where you had to turn the AR in order to succeed because they were trying to get people to do it.
Right, but that's sort of an example of forcing something that people don't really want. Now, I think along those lines, though, like watching what Snap is doing with their location-based AR, there's going to be some really cool games coming out, and they have that lighter form factor, looks a little bit more like everyday glasses.
Yeah, we didn't go in the area of location, which is really important for AR, VR.
Actually, I have an example of two games that I have played. One is Temple Run. Yeah. And I thought I was immune from the nausea effect, but not in Temple Run. Man alive, I played it like a couple times and then just turn it off.
That one was popular enough to actually be in the arcade now. They came out as an iPhone game, and then they had an arcade machine.
Oh, it was very popular in 2D mode,
yeah,
as a 2D game, but in a 3D game, it was just a little too much for me. On the other hand, there's a very immersive game that was at one time available free on the Oculus Quest and on the Oculus Go, and it's the first VR game I played when Steve here tuned me into the Quest, or to the Go, and that is Bait. It's a fishing game, and all you do is you sit there and you cast your reel and watch the thing plop into the water and you fish.
He wanted to come over to my house to use the VR to go fishing.
And all you do is you just sit there in this very, very chill environment fishing. And there are other little mini tasks to do, but and that's a good example of immersion that works because you don't have a lot of locomotion, you don't need degrees of freedom. It ran on this 3DOF Go, so it was simple and clean and clear, and everybody understands it.
So that's reminding me of something I've just started playing with that I love, and it's on the Quest Pro. It does really good mixed reality too, called Vermilion, which is basically just a painting experience. I wouldn't call it a game, but you basically, it's a very high fidelity, sit with an easel and like use different types of paints to actually paint a painting. And like you can either be in a completely virtual like studio, or it can project the easel into the world with you if you want to like paint something in real life. But it's extremely well done for that sort of like passive sitting in one place and like creating something inside this either virtual or mixed environment.
And there you've just touched on the word that I think is very important here, and that's the experience. The difference between 2D and 3D is the experience, not so much the...
Unless there's any more questions. Oh, we still have more. Okay, what's up? That's okay.
No.
I wanted to jump on the comments. Paul were lucky before he went off the deep end, and even Oculus before they were going like that. There was a Kickstarter project. Is there still room, despite the likes of Apple, ideas, and Meta, like for people like us to make things, to be makers and creators, and make art?
So the optimist in me wants to say yes. It may not. So for but I think it's going to be identifying. I think those problems to solve are going to be harder to come by. So like the original Rift Kickstarter was just this: how do we put a headset that like helps us see and interact with the virtual world? I think the more niche things. And I think there may be actually even more opportunity now because there is this ecosystem of accessories.
And tools.
And tools, yeah, like for specialized hardware or software, that will solve, more niche, like specific problems.
Yeah. Like accessories like, haptic gloves, tracking devices. Like some more specialized hardware.
So I think it's going to be more digging, I think, to
Yeah.
find out what those use cases, it's, the big problems are the ones that people with the resources are going to be throwing at them. But then that's going to, I think there'll be a network effect of that, of there being other little things that could, so like there's some really cool like companies now that are doing like, they're just 3D printing accessories for the Quest. So one of my favorite games is Mini Golf, Mini Golf by Mighty Coconut. And we hold meetings in that sometimes, like just to play around a golf and talk over things, right? But there's companies that produce like golf putters that can mount to your headset or your controller, or for pistols or other those seem like the kind of low-hanging fruit options. But then I wonder what other sort of like accessories are there things that would make these experiences more immersive, more enjoyable.
Remember, there was a time where everyone said, "Oh, everyone's going to have to be a AAA game in order to be a successful game," and then a Russian scientist came out with a game called Tetris. And remember, Tetris came out of nowhere. So is there still room for someone to come out of nowhere? Absolutely. What will that be? No way of knowing. What questions we had? Sir. I'm having a hard time hearing him. What's the question?
So if I heard it correctly, it's the reason that devices like Google Glass or Spectacles haven't caught on. Is it roughly around that?
I guess like are they produced and used at all in some devices?
Produced in what?
Are those devices produced at all today? And some of these areas, they just give up on it.
So Spectacles, I think, are still produced. You can buy them. I think they're Snap has them. So the question was like are devices like Google Glass and Spectacles still produced? Google Glass came back like trying to do another like second run at an enterprise play. I haven't heard about it since. That was a few years ago. Spectacles, though, they are being ceded to their creators. They're at that stage, kind of like the early HoloLens was, where they're getting them in like a small developer and creator community to see what they can do and put out those examples that would get people excited about it. I think you can order them if you want to just by applying. I think it's like $800 or something. But that's also where the cost is probably it's not on my wish list right now, right? It's not something that people are going to kind of casually, get so that they can, participate in these things. It's still early.
Remember the Google Cardboard? That was, I think, produced by Google to just get
It was a
people
skunk work
interested.
project at Google. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sir.
Privacy concerns in VR. You talked about tracking, no secret that, Meta owns Facebook and happens, market share right now. So any thoughts on concerns with privacy?
Yeah, definitely. Lots of privacy concerns. If you talk about, checking eye, gaze, checking body motion, checking even like heart rate, everything. I think.
Medical information.
Yeah, medical information.
Users' environments.
Yeah.
But this is not different from the computer industry now. We were not aware of the privacy issues 10 years ago, or at least we were aware of them. They weren't as big. So there's no difference from this in the computer usage.
Well, there is some difference, one difference, and that is that the very business model of companies like Google and Meta concern your private data. So
Google
it's
does
their goal
not
to
want
know.
your private data. Google wants the data of everyone being generated doing things in general. So
Right.
they make you anonymous, and they're doing a really good job of that. So your personal data is not looked at. Your collaborative data, yes.
There's an enterprise concern there too, though. Like some of the things I think. I'd have to do more digging on this, but I think broadly, these new forms of data that we're able to track, in terms of people's movements, people's voices, people's, environments, all of this is stuff that could potentially reveal things that like being able to diagnose medical conditions or make, determinations. For enterprise or for businesses that may be using this for training, that's data that could potentially be exploited or abused or be legally actionable. There's whole areas of concerns around that, both from like individual rights and from company rights, and that need to be worked out.
Those are a
It's-
whole different set of rules.
Yeah.
And by the way, our privacy laws here are nothing compared to European Union.
Yep.
They're the ones who are giving Meta the big fines, and they're the ones who are going to be driving the privacy issue. So it's not a bigger concern here in the U.S. as it is over there.
I was just going to say, it's not just one problem for the United States. It's multiple problems for multiple countries.
The EU is the one who gave us the bigger fines.
Yeah.
I'm going to close us down now at this point. I think we've got a few people left, and we can talk offline. Thank you for coming, and thank you for attending all the way through this. This has been fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.